when you run for higher office or re-election, you run on what you've accomplished. What is it that you have accomplished in office that says you should be mayor again?
Well, first of all, we have a bright and a good future, but that didn't happen by accident. It took work to get us to the position to have that opportunity to have a good and a bright future. And that came in many different ways. Our economic development activity, where we've either created or retained 30,000 jobs, and we developed downtown and other neighborhoods. Our transformation plan for education that invested in our children in a way that we've increased graduation rates from around 50% up to about 72%. Not good enough, but it shows progress. The fact that we're bringing on additional police officers and not only looking at crime as something we have to do with enforcement, but also bringing on and establishing our prevention, intervention, and opportunity for youth and young adults, and investing in those areas that we believe are the cause of crime, so that we can invest in people that way. Creating more equity as we move into the future. As we move into the future in a way that allows everybody to participate in that quality life and prosperity. Because it is about what you've done, but it's also about the positioning for the future. And my experience and my judgment has shown that we've done it in the past, and we'll do it in the future.
What do you see as the biggest challenges facing the city, and how do you address them?
Well, there are several challenges. There's not one major challenge. It always depends on what you're talking about. Education and getting education right will always be a challenge, because we have to continue to move forward. Public safety will always be a challenge, because we have to ensure that our communities are safe. Economic development and ensuring that people participate in the jobs and the wealth and the opportunities we create there. All of these things are tied together. There's no one thing that is the biggest challenge. They're the combination of all these things, because remember, we're a city. We're not silo kind of things, and everything depends on each other. One thing I would mention is that we were able to stay out of bankruptcy with 12 successive balanced budget, even during the Great Recession, that has allowed us to continue to provide services to people, continue to enhance those services, continue to position Cleveland for the future, continuing to change that perception and that attitude of Cleveland. All these things are part of what we do to ensure that good and bright future.
Much has been made of downtown success. We saw it in 2016. But have the city's neighborhoods been ignored at the expense of that?
There's no ignoring of anything. It's just like any, if you're a private investor, you will invest wherever you believe you can make money, make a profit. And when it comes to the city, since we don't invest based on profit, we invest based on needs. And of our capital dollars, we've spent over $500 million since I've been mayor in capital projects. Over 90% of that has been spent outside the central business district, which is downtown. But where you see private investment going along with that, you will see private investment going into areas where they believe they can make a profit. That is why we created our $65 million fund, $25 million from the city, $40 million from the banks. And with that $65 million investment fund, that initiative will allow us to underwrite risk in neighborhoods where traditional development models and investment models don't work. And that will ensure that we can get the same kind of opportunities and investment opportunities from the private sector that we get in neighborhoods or downtown that are doing well. We can get them in other areas that simply cannot promote private investment because of many different reasons.
2005 was my first mayor's race that I covered. And what I remember as the turning point was 2 months before the election. Brandon McLeod is shot by Cleveland police. And you became the candidate that was going to bridge City Hall, the police, and the community together. What would candidate Jackson then say about where things stand today?
We're much better. We're much better than we were before. You have to remember when I first became mayor, there was, I think, over 30 or so, I don't know the exact number, of use of excessive force cases, some of which were deadly force that had not been resolved. So one of the very first press conference I had was to say that the use of excessive force will not be tolerated. Then we brought in a special prosecutor to review all that backlog. We got it all caught up. We set time limits on the review of police, the prosecutor's office, and making decisions, administrative decisions around discipline, those kind of things. And when there were a couple of instances in the city of Cleveland that were very high profile, we asked the Department of Justice to come in to look at our practices and our procedures and our policies. Now, we had been doing that already, but we were doing it like incrementally, one thing at a time. And whenever you do things incrementally, what happens is they don't last long because they're not supported by anything. The consent decree with the Department of Justice really gives us an overall framework, a blueprint for total reform. And so now we are investing in training, whether it's crisis intervention, use of deadly force, bias-free policing. We're investing in community engagement, community policing. We're bringing on more police officers. We're giving them better technology. All of our police officers now have body cams, and that has allowed us to have a better understanding of what actually happened when there's a complaint or there's a shooting. It has also reduced the number of complaints we've had from citizens. Why? Because they're on camera from the citizens' point of view and from the police point of view. So we're much better. But just like education, just like economic development, like neighborhood development, all these things are works in progress. We have not reached the pinnacle of any of these things, including the relationship between the public and the police. So we're always in a constant motion of getting better.
You talk about responsibly adding 300 police officers. The tax hike last year bringing in about $80 million. That's going to eat up most of that.
Well, it depends. It does. But what you have to look at is that in a practical sense, we're talking about 300 additional police officers in terms of numbers by the year 2020. We're not talking about next year. Give you an example. Next year, we plan on putting 5 classes on, 5 police cadet classes on. Of those 5, we figure we can get a total of around 250 or more. But we'll be attriting about 80, which means 80 will leave the job. So that'll give us a net of 170. So we believe by the year 2020, we can increase the manpower by 300. Now that's a very practical, and we look at it year by year based on budget and to see how that flows. But you're right, to anyone who would say I'm gonna bring on 300 or 400 or 500 police officers at one time is not only is impractical, it's financially is impossible to do. But if you do it incrementally, as we plan on doing, with a strategic plan wrapped in this reform with the consent decree, it can be done, and we can financially handle it, and at the same time we can, in a practical way, get them through the classes.
Chief Calvin Williams is getting rave reviews, even from Zach Reed, but Zach has been critical of the decision post-Tamir Rice, post-November 2012 police chase and shooting, with the elevation of your police chief and safety director at the time. Fair criticism?
Well, everyone, you know, it was a political time. People criticize whatever they want to criticize. The men, as was demonstrated, those were the only 2 men who stood up for holding police accountable during the East Cleveland shooting and the Tamir Rice shooting. And as a result of that, we fired 5 police officers in East Cleveland shooting and 1 police officer with Tamir Rice. Those firings happened under Director McGrath. There was only 2 men. Everyone else was saying that they did nothing wrong. And it's the same union that supported my opponent who said they did nothing wrong. So these are men who are professional men who toed the line and said that this is wrong. We're going to hold people responsible, but we were fair. We were fair because we did an honest review of the facts, the circumstances, the whole situation, and after a deliberate and process of due process, we came to the conclusion that these officers were justified in what they did, but these officers were not. And that was a fair process. That had nothing to do with politics. So these 2 gentlemen did their job, and they did it well. And as a result of that, we were able to bring closure and due process and true justice to 2 very troubling situations.
5 months ago this week, you pledged to tear down 500 homes around Cleveland schools with $5 million. We're only at, I think, 141 by mid-October. What's up with that?
Well, as you know, when you go into these things, our goal was to do 500. What we said was that we will do 500, and we are going to do 500. Our goal was to see how many of those we could do by the end of this year. Of course, as you said, about 140, we probably have another 120 or 110 under contract. So you're probably up around 300 and something, 350 or something like that, if you count the ones that are under contract to be torn down. And so we're going to be close, but we're not going to be there. But also, we've added another $8 million to that. And that $8 million now increases the radius around schools, because this is about a safe route to schools. The $5 million that we said would cover 500 homes demolition of structures, that was 500 feet around K-8 schools. We just added another $8 million, and we've increased that radius to 1,000 feet. So that's going to add many, many more hundreds of more structures that we now are able to target for demolition. How many that will be in 1,000 feet, I don't know just yet, but we will be continuing to work on that. And by the end of this year, if we're not at 500, we'll be close, either torn down or under contract. And going into next year, we'll have additional $8 million that we'll be using to tear down additional homes.
I saw a study from 2013 that had Cleveland ranked as one of the top 10 most bloated so far as the number of city employees versus the number of residents. And it reminded me of my favorite saying is, a guest sees more in an hour than a host sees in a year. When you've been in the office for 12 years, is it possible, number one, do you think we're bloated? Number two, are you able to come in with that outsider's view and reevaluate what you have in the city?
Well, yes, in a sense, because let me just point out that when we were in the recession, and when we were the state had cut our budget, we were at bare bones in terms of service delivery, bare bones, and people were complaining about the fact that we had to cut out leaf pickups. We couldn't sweep the streets anymore. At one time, we closed the rec centers on Saturdays, right, on weekends. So people were complaining about the lack of service. We went from around, I think around 9,000 employees to less than 8,000 now. You know, we're probably around 7,800. So we've lost significant through attrition and not backfilling, being more efficient. But at the end of the day, in order to deliver service, You have to have people deliver the service. We cannot do leaf pickups or sweep streets or keep the rec centers open. So once the issue 32 passed, we were able to enhance those services and bring back those services that had been cut and enhance, because now we have more building and housing inspectors. We have more people working in the Department of Aging. We have more people in the health department who deal with lead. We have more people dealing with instructional activity around youth in our rec centers. We are able to pick up leaves. We're able to sweep the streets. We're able to do those things. So we believe that we're at the right number to do what we have to do. Now, can we be efficient? We can always be more efficient. You can always be more efficient, but we were at bare bone. And the individuals who we had and the operation that they were part of were under stress because we were getting the best and the most we could get out of them. And even by cutting back service, they were still stressed. We still couldn't inspect enough abandoned buildings. We still couldn't do enough programming. We couldn't sweep streets. We couldn't plow snow the way we wanted to. We couldn't do those kinds of things. Now we're able to, but you need people to do that. But we will not, even with bringing on additional people to do that, we will not ever get to the number of people that we had when I first became mayor, which was 9,000 or more. We're far below that.
You talk about economic development. We've made the bid for Amazon.
Yes.
What can you tell us about it?
Well, as you know, we can't give you details of the proprietary kind of thing because we are in a
and that's essentially the same approach that was taken with the RNC.
It's the same approach because once you get into a competitive situation, you don't want your Amazon should know what you're talking about. The rest of the world should not, because they have to evaluate, and so we're not sharing that with the whole world. But what we are sharing is that we believe that we're in good competition, that we have a good chance of making the short list. Now, once we make the short list, of course, then you have to step it up. It's the same thing that happened with the RNC. When we were just one of many cities, everything was close to the vest. As we made the short list, then things become a little bit more intense. You have to step your game up a little bit, right? And the same thing will happen here.
Safe to say, did you propose one option, multiple options in the city or outside of the city?
Well, what they wanted a site. And so they didn't want, you got five, you pick. They wanted a site. And as you know, in order to make a site work, sites are different in terms of what the economic impact or what you have to do in order to make that site work as opposed to this site. So it gets too convoluted and complicated. What they wanted was a site.
What was your reaction September 13th on that morning when you woke up and you knew that Zach was your opponent?
More power to him. I had to have an opponent. It didn't matter to me who it was.
And finally, as you look back over the last 12 years, any regrets, anything you would have done differently?
I don't know. You know, that's a better question to ask me as I go into my next term and when I actually get to the point of no longer being mayor, then I can talk about things I would have done different or things I'm most proud of. Because once you begin to look at legacies and things like that, you're already in the retirement mode, right? And so I'm not there. I'm not there. We have a lot to do. We have a great opportunity for a good and bright future, but it's not guaranteed. We still have some unfinished work to do, and I'm up for that, and I'm ready to do it.